Ripley's Believe It or Not presents Thomas Edison's Secret. The United States Patent Office, Washington, D.C. In 1868, a patent was issued for an electrical boat recorder. It was the first machine of its kind, and the first patent for its young inventor. His name was Thomas Alva Edison. In succeeding years, Edison patented many other important inventions. In 1877, the speaking machine or phonograph, which was the first mechanical method for reproducing sound. It opened the way for the jukebox, stereo, hi-fi, dictating machines, tape recorders, and aids to human hearing. All are his brainchildren. 1885, the first induction method for transmitting telegraph signals from moving trains or between ships was also invented by Thomas Edison. 1891, a patent was applied for on a kinescopic camera which could photograph moving images on a band of film and viewed by peeping into a small box. It was the foundation of the giant industry of motion pictures. The forerunner of widescreen, 3D, and home movies. All made possible by Thomas Edison. The one achievement, however, that made him world famous was the incandescent electric lamp. But Edison was not the only 19th century pioneer in electricity. In Boscova, New Hampshire, another inventor had produced a miniature railroad consisting of two cars which moved on a track, electrically driven. It was the ancestor of the streetcar. In 1851, the city of Boston installed America's first electric fire alarm system, also a direct result of the same man's work. He also invented the electric lamp, whose filament was made of platinum wire. The current was supplied by a wet cell battery. In 1858, he lit his living room with two such lights. Yet the fact is that Edison did not invent the first electric light. That had been done by the same man who created the electric train. His name? Moses G. Farmer. And he had accomplished it when Edison was a boy of 12. Thomas Edison had only made it practical 20 years later. Believe it or not. Ripley's Believe It or Not presents the man who gave Adam back his rib. One of the greatest mysteries of man is the mystery of his own body. For centuries, the detailed study of the functions and the workings of the human body was considered a crime. One of the first to try bringing light into the darkness was the Greek Hippocrates, now considered the father of modern medicine. Yet because he relied on faulty texts rather than forbidden experiment, he included many errors in his work, which were taken as the truth by those who followed him. Such a one was Galen, who practiced medicine in Rome in the 2nd century A.D. The Romans, like the Greeks, discouraged the dissection of human bodies. But the Romans loved combats and contests. In the great Colosseum, gladiators battled with sword and spear and trident, often to the death. Galen cleverly learned the forbidden science by treating the wounded gladiators and furtively examining the dead after these bloody contests. It was the middle of the 16th century before one man's curiosity drove him to defy the ban on human dissection. Andreas Vesalius, professor of the University of Padua, had to steal out in the dead of night to rob cemeteries for his specimens. Body after body he dissected, and the more he worked, the more disturbed he became. It could not be true. But it was true. Both men and women all had the same number of ribs. Everyone had taken for granted that men had one less rib than women since the time of Adam. Vesalius knew it was dangerous to fly in the face of superstition. But in the end, truth won out. He made his momentous announcement. A bombshell of protest burst about his head. He was insulted and reviled. He was hauled before the Inquisition and condemned to death. But because of the high regard in which he was held, he was permitted to atone for his sin by making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. On the way, his ship went down in a storm, taking to the bottom of the sea a man who dispelled a hoax and established a truth. Believe it or not. Ripley's Believe It or Not presents The Death Curse of the White Chamois. The great Austro-Hungarian Empire was in its last years. Franz Joseph I was the emperor, and his people loved him. But not the heir-apparent, his nephew, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. A strong-minded man, his main interests were military and hunting. So much did the Archduke enjoy the sport of killing that he went on worldwide safaris. In his lifetime, he killed over 5,000 animals, but one was to prove his undoing and bring on even a more terrible slaughter. In the spring of 1913, the Archduke was hunting in Bohemia when he spotted a rare white chamois. Here was an exceptional trophy. His guide warned him that killing a white chamois would bring the curse of death on the hunter. His Imperial Highness laughed at this superstition. About a year later, the Archduke was returning to Vienna to prepare for a royal tour of Bosnia. Before reaching the capital, the journal box on the royal train mysteriously caught fire. This may have been the first sign of the dreadful curse, but it did not deter the Archduke. While in Vienna, the Archduke gave his watch to his longtime valet. He instructed him to stand by the royal family and serve them faithfully should he not return. June 28, 1914, the Archduke began his tour with a visit to Sarajevo. Scattered through the crowd were 7 conspirators, members of a secret Serbian society, armed with concealed revolvers and bombs. Fearful for his life, the Archduke plotted another route for his return trip through the city. But the driver made a wrong turn. They were back on the main road. Royal blood had been shed, but the assassin's bullets touched off something far bigger. In the deadly conflict that followed, over 10 million persons lost their lives. This time, the dreaded curse of the White Chamois took its biggest toll. Believe it or not. Ripley's Believe It or Not presents The Useless Watch. From earliest times, when knighthood was in flower and King Richard was known as the Lion-Hearted, courage, fortitude, and patience have been a British tradition. When in 1802, all Europe trembled at the phenomenal rise to power of Napoleon Bonaparte and the growing might of his battalions, the people of Britain looked implacably across the Straits of Dover and waited. Separated only by the waters of the English Channel, the British Isles lay threatened as a target for inevitable invasion. To meet the crisis in its own small way, the townfolk of Rye set up an armed sentry, assigned to watch with unblinking eye for the appearance of the famed Corsican. Patiently, the armed guard concentrated his gaze on anything that might appear on the horizon. Day and night, in weather fair and foul, he watched. Week after week he watched. Months passed. Napoleon's star was in the ascendancy. He crowned himself emperor. On the continent, his victorious armies brought nation after nation to its knees in defeat. But the guardian of Rye was unimpressed by the triumphs of the Corsican corporal. On sea and land, the war raged. At Austerlitz and Jena, from Spain to Russia, undaunted, the armed sentry remained at his post, continuing year after year. Waterloo, Napoleon was routed. Defeated and exiled, he died on the rocky island of St. Helena in 1827. But the Guard still kept his sharp-eyed watch, for by now a tradition had been firmly established, a British tradition to be handed down from father to son. The sailing vessel had gone with the wind as steamships appeared. The covered wagon passed into oblivion as the iron horse rumbled across the land. As the last redskin bit the dust, the watch for Napoleon continued. The pony gave way to the horseless carriage. Men learned to fly. While others were having fun listening to a newfangled invention or watching an exciting cricket match, Chummy Barton, the last of the line, continued to guard Britain against the Napoleonic menace. World War I, then World War II. In 1944, he died, and with him ended a tradition. The town fathers had decided the Napoleonic specter existed no longer. So ended an unbroken vigil that had lasted 142 years. Believe it or not.
Ripley's Believe It or Not presents The Broom That Changed History. A simple broom of twigs. With this unlikely weapon, one man stood off the armed might of a great revolution and saved the lives of hundreds of his countrymen. The reign of terror had swept over France. The thirsty guillotine claimed its daily ration of the blood of France's aristocrats. In the Palace of Justice, the dreaded tribune daily meted out the sentences of death. In the halls of the courts, a laborer plied his broom, unnoticed by the officials of the new revolutionary government, who passed him by without a glance. Charles de la Boussière was no ordinary laborer. An aristocrat born, he disguised his gentle manners and blistered his soft hands with this menial work by day. At night, the records of those condemned to death were his prime concern. Based on wild, unsubstantiated rumors, they were the accusations that sent innocent men and women to the guillotine. Every paper represented a human life. With the charges against them destroyed, scores of victims went free, unaware that they owed their lives to a humble sweep. One day he looked up from his broom, and his heart stopped. Too well he knew her next walk would be toward the dreaded blade of the guillotine. Fired with love at first sight, Boussière silently vowed to save her, even though it might cost him his own life. After learning her name, he ventured into the file on titled citizens. She was Josephine Beauharnais, a widow. Her husband had already perished on the guillotine. Unknowingly, she ignored the man who had saved her life. and shortly married another, Napoleon Bonaparte. Because she lived and became the wife of a world power, Josephine helped create an empire that changed the history of Europe because of the love of a man who pushed a broom. Believe it or not.
Ripley's, Believe It or Not, presents The Secret Treasure of Monte Cassino. The year was 1878. In a little antique shop on Duane Street in New York, a girl tearfully searched her empty pocketbook. Catherine Folsom had received a birthday gift from her parents. She could purchase what she would. Then she discovered that she had lost her money. The storekeeper, who had a little daughter himself in far-off Rome, could understand the child's tears. And so he gave her a little gift, which she would cherish forever, a parchment chart inscribed with a sketch of a monument and bearing on it the words, "On May 1st at 6 o'clock in the morning, I have a golden head." It was a gift to intrigue any imaginative child. In April 1884, Catherine married Charles Newell and moved to Italy. The whole panorama of Italy served as a perfect background for their honeymoon. It was shortly after the couple had visited Monte Cassino that Catherine realized that the picture of the monument on the parchment she had received as a child was that of the famous abbey itself. Yet she nor her husband could find any meaning in the enigmatic words inscribed on the chart. On May 1st at 6 o'clock in the morning, I have a golden head. All that night, Catherine could not sleep, puzzled by the words. The dawn announced the day which Catherine realized was May 1st. The long shadow of the monument, as drawn on the parchment, resembled a golden crown. Now it was a race against time. At exactly 6 a.m., Charles Newell began to dig at the appointed spot where the shadow of the monument fell. It was not long before the ground yielded up a treasure worth $500,000, buried there during the Napoleonic Wars. The find was fantastic. Hundreds of golden chalices encrusted with gems, rich vestments, dozens of gold crosses studded with diamonds. Refusing a bountiful reward, Catherine Newell turned over the entire treasure to the abbey. But the grateful abbot had every one of the sacred objects inscribed with these words, "Restored to the abbey by the loving heart of a magnanimous American lady. Believe it or not." Ripley's Believe It or Not presents The Prophecy of Doom. A queen responsible for the death of 10,000 of her own subjects lived under sentence of death herself for 23 years, until the sentence was finally executed in a strangely unexpected way. She was Catherine de Medici, the most beautiful and most evil queen of France. A member of the brilliant and notorious de Medici family, her lust for power was insatiable. But because of her jealousy, Catherine could not stand the influence of Admiral de Coligny over her son, Charles IX of France. She whispered hints to the king that Coligny was plotting to seize the throne. The fearful Charles ordered the death not only of Coligny, but of all his followers. In the infamous massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, 1572, 10,000 innocent Frenchmen died by order of their own monarch. Satisfied, Catherine built the magnificent palace of the Tuileries outside Paris for her private residence. But now a soothsayer warned her that her death would occur in the vicinity of Saint Germain.
beware of Saint Germain.
Since the Tuileries was situated in the parish of Saint Germain, Catherine refused to move into the palace, and for the remainder of her life, she avoided it like the plague. Day and night, she worried about the soothsayer's prophecy. All food and clothing were screened to make sure they did not come from the fateful parish. Anyone seeking audience with the Queen was carefully questioned to make sure he did not come from Saint Germain. She grew haggard and wan in her constant battle to outwit her fate. The unremitting effort sapped her mind and body. Until 23 years later, she lay ill in Blois, 200 miles from Saint Germain. The soothsayer was wrong, she gasped. Thank you, good father, she went on. What is your name? The priest answered her, I am the Bishop of Clemenceau. My name is Jean de Saint Germain. Thus was the mysterious meaning of fate revealed, and Catherine died as the soothsayer had predicted. Beware of Saint Germain, believe it or not.